Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. This is the AYANEO Geek, by far my favorite product from the AYANEO team. This is the AYANEO 2, something that I reviewed a few weeks ago. Largely, if you were to take a look at these two devices, you'd think that they're pretty much the same. The AYANEO 2 is the premium version of the AYANEO Geek lineup. However, all of the important bits that are on the AYANEO 2 are actually on the AYANEO Geek. Now, the one thing that is unfortunate here is that the display that was sent to me was the 1200p version. So this particular model, the Geek model, the most inexpensive, the cheapest model, is supposed to have an 800p display. So unfortunately, I won't really be able to comment on that particular display. We all know that the 1200p panel on the AYANEO 2 is fantastic, and the 1200p panel on this Geek model is also fantastic. So the only thing that I would say is for people that were interested on the 800p model that you may have to wait for some user reviews. Alright, let's quickly talk about the specs, and most importantly, what are the major differences between the AYANEO 2 and the AYANEO Geek. Again, for the most part, all of the important equipment on the AYANEO 2 is present on the Geek model. We still have that really important AMD 6800U chip. There is a small but noticeable difference in the controller form factor, and for what it's worth, the offset D-pad is in a better position for me personally. We lose the additional gyro in the handle but retain the same Bosch accelerometer that already has gyro support in other software. The included NVMe is indeed a slower class storage on the Geek model, however, in reality, this won't mean much. At the moment, there's exactly one game that uses direct storage on PC, and even if AYANEO 2 storage is 2 times faster, if a direct storage game loads in 2 seconds on NVMe 4, if it takes 4 seconds on NVMe 3, will anyone really care? Thankfully, the same excellent Hall analog sticks are still present on the Geek model. These really are the absolute best sticks on any handheld out there today. If I had to say one thing I wish was different, is that the AYANEO team didn't focus so much on perfect circularity. While it is a testament to the accuracy of the sticks that they can perform a crazy accurate circle, there are some games that anticipate analog sensitivity outside of this circle. Still though, the sticks have excellent tension, concave and nice textured tops, just truly excellent. The overall form factor and design is the same as well between both models, so fit and finish between them are largely the same. So if you saw my earlier review on the AYANEO 2, the large sweeping analog triggers are a bit much for my tastes, and I would have preferred if the method of depressing the triggers was a little more standard. Rounding out, we have the same Wi-Fi 6 chipset and the 50 watt-hour battery present on both models. Up next, I quickly want to forecast the type of performance you can expect out of the AYANEO Geek. There are two sets of benchmarks here. On the left-hand side, we have 15 watt TDP, and on the right-hand side, we have 25 watt TDP. This is typically the range of power you'll be running the Geek at for most modern PC games. I'm using the default power profile on 22.11.3 AMD drivers, and I'm using Windows 11 22H2. All of the games in this are benched at a resolution of 800p with no upscaling. This is specifically to target what people should anticipate with the 800p Fantasy Black Edition of the AYANEO Geek. 4 games in this list, Batman Arkham Knight, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider are using high settings, while all the other games are using lowest settings. So let's quickly look at the benches. Up first, we're taking a look at Batman Arkham Knight, and because this game is using higher settings, when we boost up TDP, we're really not getting an appreciable performance improvement. This is one game where if you wanted to target a more consistent 60 FPS, lowering settings at 800p would be worthwhile. For Cyberpunk 2077, we can see we get pretty abysmal results at 15 watt TDP, and only at 25 watt TDP do we actually wake the system up. Again, this is still running 800p native, so using image upscaling techniques like FSR2 will really improve performance while using that same wattage, so this is something to just keep an eye on. For Dark Souls 3, upping TDP really only helps us on the lower percentiles in frame rate. Using sub-resolutions here is probably one of the only ways that we're going to be able to boost this up to 60 FPS. Because this game is already using the lowest settings possible, the only real alternative we have here would be to use sub-resolutions. For Days Gone, we do get an appreciable bump in performance when we go up to TDP up, but using sub-resolutions is once again a way that we're going to get a more consistent FPS. In this particular area, because the AYANEO Geek only has a 60 Hz panel, we can use 48 Hz with a modified bin. Typically, you're going to want to target a 30 FPS cap for these games. Now, for Deus Ex Mankind Divided, you can see that we do get an appreciable bump as we boost up to 25 watt TDP. The important thing that I want you to note here is that we are using ultra settings. So going down to lower settings will boost performance considerably, but this is going to be one area where you're getting the absolute best quality at 800p at this particular bench. For Elden Ring, we see a rather considerable increase in performance by going to 25 watt TDP. Once again, using sub-resolutions will increase this further. For Grand Theft Auto 5, we're already basically maxing out what we're going to be able to do, regardless of 15 watt or 25 watt. Lowering settings will boost performance, but really we're already hitting 60 FPS reasonably well in either scenario, so going any further here isn't going to extract anything better for you. For Horizon Zero Dawn, boosting TDP really shows a significant increase in performance. At 25 watt TDP, you're going to have a relatively good 60 FPS experience with some dips here and there. You could kind of fool around with sub-resolutions if you wanted to, but just using these particular settings is going to have a pretty good experience overall. For Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, these newer Sony games that are out here, these are definitely the types of games that you will absolutely need to use sub-resolution image upscaling techniques like FSR2 to get a more consistent FPS. Just boosting power here isn't really going to do much more for us as we boost up. Going over 25 watt also won't really considerably increase performance for us here. For Shadow of the Tomb Raider, once again, this is a game that is using the highest settings, so we do get a modest increase in performance as we boost TDP, but you could also lower the settings to increase frame rate as well. But again, this is at highest settings. And then for Uncharted The Lost Legacy, this is a game where at 22 watt TDP, at 800p native, using reasonable settings, you're actually going to have a rather consistent 30 FPS experience here. Again, these benchmarks are to supply you with an eagle-eyed view of what to expect with the AYANEO Geek. The older a PC game is, the greater chance you'll be able to run these games at higher settings. The more modern a PC game is, going to lowest settings will be required. There are two main tools you have to improve performance. One is you can use image upscaling techniques like FSR2 to upscale sub-resolutions, and in other cases, you'll need to boost power to just hit 30 FPS in these games. In this particular example, going to 33 watt allows us to hit a constant 30 FPS. However, the fan will kick into gear at this TDP, where the fan will absolutely be audible. Alright, so up in this section we're going to be talking about the new and improved AYASpace app, and there's a bunch of features and enhancements to it that are really worth talking about. So once again, you're going to press this little AYA button to bring up the AYA Quick tool. This allows you to have all quick selections that you set up. Down here are some pre-selected settings that I've set up. If you hold it down, you're going to jump into the AYASpace dashboard. So in here, if you find that you updated the AYA tool and it's in a different language, what you're going to want to do is navigate up to the AYANEO icon over here. You're going to go down to language and then select whatever language you need. Then the last part is to make sure that you're in the international version, and it should say go to international. If it says go to China, you're in the correct region, and at that point you would have set up the AYASpace app to be for your language and for your region. Now, the big part of the AYASpace app that is worth noting is the application center. Now, right now there are only 5 different applications here. We're going to touch base on a few of them. There's the metadata editor. I'm not going to touch base on that. There are 2 different types of fan controls. I have Smart Fan currently installed. Then there's also Smart TDP. This one is actually pretty huge because this is AYA's attempt at auto TDP, and then there's Agile Mouse. Agile Mouse allows you to fine-tune the mouse emulation that's on the analog stick. We'll take a look at SmartFan in that right now just because it's rather quick. So what you can do is you can just press A in here, and then you're going to press Y to manage it. And at this point, you're going to see the fan curve that I've created. It is in software, and I've selected custom, at which point you can then select whatever fan curve you have. At this point, you can see I keep it really low, fan RPM as low as it possibly can get, up until 50 degrees Celsius. And then even at 70 degrees Celsius, I don't have the fan going all that high. It's still under 50%. Only at 80 degrees Celsius and above do I have it really ramping up. At that point, you're really doing something wrong, and it gives me an audible cue that something has gone amiss. So there is no real reason that I want to be running at these temperatures, especially with the Auto TDP app. This is what I have. If you take a look at the ladder curve, this is not something that I really like either. I prefer linear just because it's going to have a nice fade in or out of that increase into or decrease to of RPM of the fan. We'll back out of that. Very quickly, let's take a look at Agile Mouse. And here you can see that you can quickly just kind of change a bunch of different settings, like the left button and right button were changed to the face buttons. I'm selecting them to be the bumpers. You can also make them go back or forward. You can change the speed. This is a really cool feature that I like to see and was missing prior, so that makes the mouse emulation more to my suiting, and you can make it however you want. Smart TDP we're going to get to in a moment. Now, I have Smart TDP already mapped to my AYA Quick tool, And I'll show you some of the things where you can go into a bad place with the Smart TDP app. It's still being worked on, so it's kind of almost in testing phase, but it is really nice. But you can see right down here, I've already selected the Smart TDP app to be my quick access tool. So when I just press it when I'm in a game, I can quickly enable the Smart TDP app. And there's a few things that we need to discuss about that. But before we get into that, the one thing that I want you to note is being able to customize your AYANEO itself. So we jumped into this, and you can see that it's correctly listed as the AYANEO Geek, exactly what this model is. So from here, we can change any of the different settings for the AYANEO Geek, such as the vibration intensity of the rumble motors. It's set to low, and that's pretty much fine for me. You can do the RGB lighting. I keep this off, but if you turn it on, you can clearly see that they'll go on, and you can change them to whatever color, make them blink, breathe, do whatever you want. I'm going to keep them off for right now. This is the analog calibration tool, and this is going to show you press left bumper, right bumper, the left D-pad, and B. You hold that down for 2 seconds, and then the controller, the AYANEO, will vibrate, indicating that it's ready to be calibrated, at which point you'll do a few circles on the left and right analog stick. Here's the one part that I wish was a little bit better for me, and this is still not updated on the AYANEOSpace app itself. LC and RC, these are additional buttons that AYANEO provides, but when you take a look at the available buttons that you can map these to, I would really like these to be able to be mapped to whatever I please. I would like it to be the S key on a keyboard. Having it be predetermined on what this is not something that I feel is the best. There are a bunch of different kind of customized settings, but I would prefer if I had the opportunity to change that to whatever I wanted. Up here is a hotkey selection. Right now I have it off, but it allows you that if you were to hold down the trigger, that you could hold this down and press the D-pad to do different types of hotkey stuff. Having this off is something that I want. Here you can see that you can select bursting modes or turbo modes for any of the particular buttons, which is pretty cool to see. Here you have different configurations for the face buttons. So standard being Xbox, Japanese style being Nintendo style, so it would be BAYX, basically inverted. I keep this standard just because it's kind of just in my head, that's how it should be for Windows-based platforms, is to be Xbox style. And then capping this off, we have the little button over here next to the AYASpace button, which will allow you to have, once again, pre-configured buttons that allow you to do it. By default, it's show desktop. So if I press this, it would jump me to the desktop. Then we can jump back into right where we were. Showing the desktop if a game is in borderless windows is really nice to have. Now, the last part that I want to talk about for the AYASpace app, we're going to talk about the AYATDP tool, the Smart TDP tool. So let's go ahead and show you what that's like. I'm going to go... Okay, so at this point, we're going to talk about AYANEO's new Auto TDP tool. Now, one thing to note here is that right now, nothing is being set. So we're using around 22 watts of power on package, around 35 watt total to run this game at 60 FPS at the current settings. The one thing to note is that when you use the Auto TDP tool, what it's doing is much like my Phawx tweaks from before where we statically clock the GPU, except the Auto TDP tool will try to look at what's going on and then calibrate the static GPU clock based on frame rate. Now, the one thing where you can go bad is if you change the TDP to something too low, that means that you're going to be constraining where the Auto TDP app is going to be working. So what you want to do is keep the TDP to a relatively high number, a high cap. It doesn't mean that it's going to use that much. It just means that we're allowed to use that much. And it's going to give the Auto TDP tool a little bit more room to actually work. Now, right now I have relatively low settings. The problem is that if I actually bump settings to be very high, specifically on this particular panel, if I go ahead and do... Alright, so at this point, we are now resolving at full 1200p with ultra nightmare settings, and you can see that we're not actually able to hit full frame rate. We're using still 22 watts of power, which is kind of what the default for the AYANEO Geek will kind of settle itself at. Let's see what happens when I go ahead and enable the Auto TDP tool itself. So we're going to go here, I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to say, I want you to target 60 FPS, which is already there, and I'm going to say, go ahead and start. Now, if you don't have this already installed, it will jump you to RTSS, Riva Tuner Statistics Server, for you to install because it actually needs that to be able to run. So now that I've gone ahead and started the Auto TDP tool, we're going to actually have the GPU clock being statically set now. Now, the one thing that it's going to do wrong here is that it can't hit 60 FPS, so it's going to keep on bumping up the GPU clock, trying its best to actually hit a higher frame rate. And what happens is because we don't have enough power, it's going to continue to ramp up that GPU, and our frame rate's actually going to get worse and worse. because now AMD is not doing anything, and AMD's own profile and how it actually does power in the background isn't absolutely efficient, which is why all these auto TDP apps have been coming out. But you can see really clearly here that using the auto TDP tool, if we push it too high and there is not enough power, specifically we're at a 22 watt TDP cap, that it will just keep on ramping up the GPU even though it doesn't have the power and we're not hitting that 60 FPS cap, and it's actually getting worse. So what we need to do here actually is we need to lower our settings. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a static resolution scale and do 50%, so we're running half of 1200p. And here you can see that now the auto TDP tool is going to have a better time understanding and kind of fitting the GPU clock inside of that wattage, that TDP cap that we had. And it's going to do a better job overall. Now you can see our GPU clock is around 1 gigahertz now. We went down to 55 FPS, 53 FPS. It's going to bump that GPU clock up a little bit more. We're at 1.1 gigahertz. And we're pretty good at 60 FPS right now. So it took basically around 20 to 30 seconds before the auto TDP app basically figured out where it needs to be. We're at 1.3 gigahertz right now, but you can see we're not wasting power like we were before. We're at basically 20 watt, 19 watt, but our total system power is at 32 watt. So we're saving around 2 to 3 watts total system power over allowing the AMD side to do it automatically versus the auto TDP tool that AYANEO provided. Ultimately, AYANEO's auto TDP app does work well. However, if you select a target frame rate that it can't hit, in this particular instance, we're trying to hit 60 FPS. If you do that and you have a TDP cap that's relatively low, and for what it's worth, you're pretty much going to be at 22 watt here. Even at 22 watt, that's not going to have enough power in the hopper to achieve a 60 FPS cap. But this is looking at AYANEO's auto TDP app. It's still being worked on. They do not really do CPU modulation at the moment. No particular tool does that out of Cypher's bat at the moment. This still does a pretty decent job when we're just looking at GPU clocks. To cap things off here, again, I just want to remind you, if you were to enable this tool, it's going to statically set the GPU clock. So if you were to go ahead and stop the operation of AYANEO's auto TDP tool, it's going to stay locked at 1.2 gigahertz until you put the machine to sleep. So if I just kind of press the power button right there and put the machine to sleep, we'll give it a few seconds to kind of enter its asleep state. And there you go. You can see that because the system's not really doing anything in the current moment, the GPU clock already clocked down to about 400 megahertz. You can see it's automatically kind of swinging back and forth. If we were to go back into Doom itself right here, we're going to go back to using a bunch of power, and we're going to jump up to about, what, 37 watt, 38 watt. Now the 22 watt TDP that it's set to, its PL2 is what, 24 watt, so it's between 22 and 24 watt, but that's only going to be for about 28 seconds. But you can see that we're just wasting power here. We were going down to about 32 watt, 31 watt total system power, so at this particular moment we're saving power even when the system doesn't really need to be using that power. So that is the value that AYANEO's auto TDP app provides. It's easy to use. I definitely recommend it. Just make sure that you pay attention to what's going on, because if frame rate's going down, it typically means that you have to lower the settings. And that's pretty much the end of this particular look at the AYASpace app and the new auto TDP tool. Let's talk about the rest of the AYANEO Geek. I can't really say enough good things about the entry-level AYANEO Geek. Even though it is the cheapest model out of all of AYANEO's newest product portfolio, it has everything that matters. It has these very good analog sticks, the circularity part notwithstanding, a very good D-pad, easily the best D-pad that AYANEO has ever produced. The overall form factor of the device is truly excellent. So if you were looking at AYANEO's lineup and something that you were like favoring out of all the different handhelds that were available today, I could honestly recommend the Fantasy Black Edition as the one to go for if you were on the fence about any particular model. That's it from me, guys. As always, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.